How do you poison something that eats planets? It's a serious question. You don't use toxins. The Hive Mind has consumed species that breathe chlorine and drink acid for hydration. You don't use disease. It catalogs every pathogen, studies it, and then weaponizes it for its own arsenal. And you certainly don't use conventional weapons. What good is a lasgun against a creature that considers entire star systems an aperitif? The answer was discovered by accident on Kasterborous VII by a man who couldn't even spell Tyranid correctly on his requisition forms. A man whose greatest military achievement prior to this incident was once brewing a batch of recaf that was only mostly fatal. This is not a story of glorious war. This is a pest control problem. And Corporal-Chef Kuznetsov was about to become the galaxy's most unlikely exterminator.
The Imperial Guard field kitchen on Kasterborous VII violated 17 separate health codes, most of which were so ancient they were written on vellum. The smell alone qualified as a minor daemon incursion under inquisitorial guidelines, subsection 4, paragraph 2b, odors that should not be and possibly are gaining sentience. Corporal-Chef Dmitri Kuznetsov stood before his industrial cooking vats, consulting the day's menu, or rather what the Departamento Munitorum claimed was a menu. To Dmitri, it looked more like a chemical weapons manifest with delusions of nutrition. Standard Russian Pack 7 Alpha, he read aloud to his assistant, Private Jenkins, who was attempting to scrape something off the floor that might have been food, a servitor component, or in the process of achieving sentience. Content: protein substitute, carbohydrate substitute, vitamin supplement, flavor deterrent. Flavor deterrent? Jenkins asked, giving up on the scraping. The thing on the floor had started scraping back. Prevents excess consumption, Dmitri explained, stirring a pot of gray substance that bubbled despite being room temperature. Can't have the guard enjoying their meals. Might affect morale in unpredictable ways. The commissariat is very clear on this. For 23 years, Dmitri had served the guard as a cook. This was not by choice. He'd enlisted to be a tank driver. But after an incident involving a Lehman Russ, 3 tons of ammunition, and what the report called aggressive parallel parking into the colonel's command tent, he'd been reassigned to a position where it was believed he could do less damage. The administratum had clearly never eaten his cooking. "Sir," Jenkins said, examining a barrel of ingredients with the caution of a bomb disposal expert, "this protein powder expired in 899 M41. Still good," Dmitri assured him. "Expiration dates are just suggestions from the weak-willed. Besides, aging adds character, like a fine Amasac." "Amasac doesn't turn green and growl when you open it. The best ones do."
Dmitri approached cooking the way a tech priest approached sacred machinery, with ritual, dedication, and a profoundly dangerous misunderstanding of what he was actually doing. His kitchen arsenal was less a collection of spices and more a manifest from the Departamento Munitorum's hazardous materials division. He had industrial degreaser ex-mine, which he insisted was for stubborn flavors, and promethium cooking fuel to add a smoky finish. For the regiment's more devout members, there was blessed machine oil to satisfy religious dietary requirements, while floor polish T77 was employed to create an attractive glaze. His preferred tenderizer, a tub of sacred unguent of unbinding. Each bottle came with warnings, usually in High Gothic, featuring pictograms of screaming stick figures. Dmitri treated them as serving suggestions. After all, if the Emperor didn't want these chemicals in food, why did he make them taste so interesting? Today, Dmitri announced to his staff of 3 half-functioning servitors and a deeply worried Jenkins, "We prepare something special. The regiment's about to enter combat. They deserve a meal that will stay with them." He had no idea how literally. "Begin with the soup course," Dmitri commanded, donning a stained apron that bore his personal motto, "Quantity before quality, but preferably neither." He started by pouring 200 liters of water, a term used loosely for what was mostly runoff from the motor pool, into the massive pot. To this, he added 50 kilograms of standard-issue protein paste, followed by a generous splash of industrial degreaser X9, which he claimed was for stubborn flavors, and promethium cooking fuel to add a smoky finish. For the regiment's more devout members, there was blessed machine oil to satisfy religious dietary requirements, while floor polish K77 was employed to create an attractive glaze. His preferred tenderizer? A tub of sacred unguent of unbinding. Each bottle came with warnings, usually in High Gothic, featuring pictograms of screaming stick figures. Dmitri treated them as serving suggestions. After all, if the Emperor didn't want these chemicals in food, why did he make them taste so interesting?
The mess hall filled with guardsmen, their faces bearing the resigned expression of men who knew that while death in battle was probable, death by dinner was a certainty. "What's on the menu today, Cookie?" asked Sergeant Hammond, a veteran who'd survived 13 campaigns and, more impressively, Dimitri's cooking for 6 years. "I call it deconstructed biopaste with industrial finishing," Dmitri announced proudly. "Served with a side of fermented grain substitute, lightly seasoned with Compound 4. "What's Compound 4? "No idea, but it's on the approved Monitorum ingredients list, right between Compound 3, do not ingest, and Compound 5, restricted to penal legions." The guardsmen ate. They always ate. Not because they were hungry, but because in the Imperial Guard, refusing a meal was technically heresy, punishable by being first in line for the next one. Besides, after the first few bites, the nerve endings in their mouths usually surrendered anyway. Private Morrison was the first to comment, "Tastes like victory." "That's the floor polish," Dmitri explained. "Gives it that shine." "No, I meant it tastes like I'm winning a battle against my own digestive system." "Exactly! Preparation for tomorrow's combat. You can't fight Xenos if you can't fight your own internal organs first." What none of them knew was that tomorrow's combat would involve something far worse than orcs or Eldar. Tomorrow, the Tyranids would arrive, and they would make a terrible, terrible mistake. They would try to eat the Imperial Guard. The skies split open like an overripe fruit, and things that should not exist began to pour through. Hive Fleet Gorgon had found Kasterborous VII. But Dmitri Kuznetsov didn't see humanity's greatest predator descending from the heavens. He saw a customer service complaint waiting to happen. "Sir!" Jenkins burst into the kitchen, covered in ichor and terror. "The Tyranids! They're eating everyone!" Dmitri looked up from his prep work, annoyed. Of course they're eating everyone, Jenkins. It's what they do. Like restaurant critics, but more honest about their intentions. What do we do? Dmitri considered this. 23 years of institutional cooking had taught him one universal truth. Every creature, no matter how alien, had dietary restrictions. The trick was finding them. Jenkins, he said slowly, what happens when the Tyranids eat our boys? They consume their biomass? Precisely. And what did our boys eat for the last 24 hours? Jenkins' face went a shade of white, usually reserved for bleached fatigues. You're cooking. My art, Dmitri corrected. And if there's one thing I know about my art, it's that it stays with you, follows you, haunts you, sometimes literally. Private Thompson swears his lunch from last Tuesday still whispers to him at night. A plan formed in Dmitri's mind. Not a good plan, not a sane plan, but most definitely a terrible one. Jenkins, how much industrial degreaser do we have left? About 6 tons, sir. Why? We're going to cook the meal of a lifetime, specifically the last meal of about 10,000 lifetimes. The Tyranids want biomass. Fine, we'll give them biomass, seasoned to perfection.
While the Imperial Guard died gloriously in the trenches, Dmitri and Jenkins worked gloriously in the kitchen. This wasn't cooking anymore. This was chemical warfare with a garnish. "Temperature on Vat 7, Dmitri called out, his voice echoing in the metallic space. 800 degrees, sir. Perfect. Add the promethium reduction. If it doesn't explode, it's not properly caramelized. The kitchen had transformed into something between an alchemist's laboratory and a mechanicus forge. Servitors that hadn't functioned in years suddenly sparked to life, driven by the sheer, magnificent wrongness of what was being created. The walls began to sweat. The ceiling started praying to the omnisia. The meal he conceived was a 3-course symphony of terror. For the appetizer, he prepared a puree of X9, which was industrial degreaser, reduced with motor oil, served alongside a carpaccio of indefinite protein. A mystery meat so mysterious it had its own file in the Ordo Xenos archives, and topped with a foam of blessed machine oil that was somehow both holy and viscous. The main course featured promethium flambéed nutrient blocks that were still actively on fire, drizzled with a floor polish reduction with notes of despair, and accompanied by a sacred unguent jus, thick enough to be used as supplementary tank armor. Finally, for dessert, there was a light and airy compound for soufflé, a dish so potent it was legally classified as a war crime in 3 separate sectors. "Sir," Jenkins observed, his voice muffled by the full-body hazmat suit he'd stolen from the Medicaid tent, "this isn't food. This is what food has nightmares about." "Exactly," Dmitri beamed, his eyes reflecting the unnatural green glow from that 3. "The Tyranids adapt to everything. Poison, they become immune. Disease, they weaponize it. But can they adapt to something that violates the very concept of consumption? When a sommelier tastes wine, he doesn't just taste grapes. He tastes the soil, the rain, the sunshine, the hopes and dreams of the vintner. When the Tyranids taste our guardsmen, they'll taste what the guardsmen ate. And what did they eat, Jenkins? Your masterpiece. My masterpiece. 23 years of accumulated horror distilled into pure culinary antimatter. Every shortcut, every expired ingredient, every "that's probably still good" decision, concentrated into a flavor profile that makes the warp look appetizing by comparison.
The battle was not going well. The guards' defensive lines had collapsed faster than Dmitri's first attempt at a souffle. Thousands of guardsmen lay dead, their biomass being efficiently collected by the Tyranid consumption pools. The first Ripper swarm reached the corpse of Private Morrison. The tiny bioforms began their work, breaking down the biological matter for absorption. Within seconds, the biomass was processed and fed directly into the Hive Mind's greater consciousness. And then the Hive Mind tasted it. Across the entire planet, every single Tyranid creature suddenly stopped. The Hive Mind was ancient. It had consumed 1,000,000 species on 1,000,000,000 worlds. It had tasted civilizations that built their entire culture around flavor, species that communicated through taste, and beings of pure energy that existed as concepts of consumption itself. It had never, in all its eons, tasted anything like this. Query: substance classification. Analyzing. Error. Parameters outside acceptable range. Recalibrating sensory input. Warning: toxic substance detected. Correction: substance transcends toxicity. Fatal error: biomass corrupted at a conceptual level. The first termagant vomited. This was unprecedented. Tyranids didn't have the biological function to vomit. Their digestive systems only worked in one direction. But the essence of Private Morrison, filtered through Dmitri's cooking, had achieved the impossible. "Sir," a guardsman reported to the colonel, his voice crackling over the vox, "the Tyranids, is there dancing, maybe? Having seizures? It's hard to tell from here." Dmitri stood on the ramparts, watching his masterwork unfold. Below, the Tyranid assault had devolved into what could only be described as a mass food poisoning event of galactic proportions. Carnifexes stumbled into each other like drunken groks. Gargoyles fell from the sky, their wings forgotten in favor of clutching their stomachs. A hive tyrant was observed trying to scrape its own tongue off with its scything talons. "You see, Jenkins," Dmitri explained to his terrified assistant, "the Tyranids' greatest strength is also their weakness. They share everything through the Hive Mind, every sensation, every experience, every taste. When one of them tastes something, they all taste it. But they've only consumed a few hundred guardsmen. A few hundred guardsmen who've been eating my cooking for months, years in some cases. It's not just in their stomachs, Jenkins. It's in their blood, their bones, their very souls. Private Hendricks once told me he could taste my Thursday surprise in his dreams on a Tuesday.
Below them, a warrior prime attempted to command its brood. It opened its mouth to screech complex bio-orders, and instead made a sound like a wine critic who'd been served prison-grade amasek in a plastic cup that had previously held industrial degreaser X9. The Hive Mind tried to adapt. It always adapted. But how do you adapt to something that shouldn't exist? How do you develop immunity to a flamer profile that violates causality itself? Attempting biological countermeasures. Failure. Contamination is spreading. Isolating affected bioforms. Failure. Contamination is conceptual. Purging corrupted biomass. Error. All biomass is corrupted. Tactical assessment. Planet is inedible. Strategic withdrawal. Authorized.
The Hive Fleet Synapse network was in chaos. Not the organized, purposeful chaos of battle, but the kind of chaos you'd find in a restaurant kitchen when the health inspector shows up unexpectedly with a Geller Field failure scanner. "Status report," the colonel demanded. "Sir, the bioships are leaving? But they're flying erratically. One of them just crashed into another. They seem to be dry heaving?" "Bioships don't dry heave, Corporal." "You tell them that, sir." In his kitchen, Dmitri had moved on to Phase 2. If the Tyranids thought they could just leave after insulting his cooking, they had another thing coming. "Jenkins, prepare the special reserve." "Sir, no. That's been fermenting since 841.M41. The Mechanicus classified it as a potential STC for creating new forms of suffering." "Perfect. Load it into the artillery shells. If they won't come to dinner, dinner will come to them." The Imperial Guard's basilisks artillery had been modified with Dmitri's special sauce shells. Each one contained the concentrated essence of 23 years of kitchen disasters, compressed into a liquid that technically existed in 11 dimensions, 3 of which were apologizing for the others. "Fire!" The shells arced through the atmosphere, piercing the bioship's fleshy hulls. The special reserve spread through the ship's internal systems like a bad review, written by someone who'd lost their job, their spouse, and their faith in humanity, all during the appetizer course.
The true revelation came not from the battlefield, but from the Hive Mind itself. For the first time in its eternal existence, it experienced something beyond hunger. It experienced regret. Deep within the bioship's consciousness, the Hive Mind conducted what could only be described as a performance review. Fleet efficiency, 0%. Biomass acquisition, negative. Net loss due to active rejection. Tactical assessment. Planet is toxic to existence itself. Recommendation, quarantine system. Addendum, quarantine neighboring systems for good measure. Further addendum, perhaps quarantine entire segmentum. Burn the records, salt the warp. Final note, investigate possibility that Imperial cooking is a chaos weapon of unprecedented horror. The Norn Queen, the great biofactory of the fleet, had stopped producing new warriors. Instead, it was producing what appeared to be biological antacids the size of carnifexes, designed solely to neutralize the memory of Dmitri's cooking. A lictor, the perfect stealth organism, was discovered by guardsmen because it was loudly complaining in biochemical pheromones that translated roughly to, "Who puts floor polish in food? Who does that?" The zoanthropes, psychic creatures of immense power, were attempting to psychically forget the taste. They were failing. The flavor had somehow become psychically adhesive. One of them tried to mind wipe itself and only succeeded in making the taste retroactively worse. In the command bunker, the Vox array crackled to life, but it was broadcasting on a frequency that shouldn't exist. The Tyranid synaptic frequency, somehow converted into audible broken low Gothic. The message was simple, a broadcast of pure, unadulterated complaint. "This food is crime against existence. Biomass rejected permanently. Marking system, do not consume. Rating 0 stars, would give negative if possible. Chef is war criminal, also poor presentation. Requesting recipe for classification as forbidden." Are the Xenus flagging this planet for unsatisfactory acquisition? It appears so, sir. They're also... Wait, I'm getting pictographic data. Of what? A crude drawing of our planet, sir, with a skull and crossbones over it, and... Is that a little sad face?
The Hive Fleet's retreat had become a rout, not a military rout, but the kind of frantic departure you see from a restaurant when someone finds live groks in their soup. Bioships collided with each other in their haste to escape the system's gravitational pull and, more importantly, its lingering culinary aura. Smaller organisms were simply abandoned, left to wander the battlefield in a daze, occasionally stopping to dry heave despite not having the physical capacity to do so. One hormigont was observed trying to eat dirt, apparently in an attempt to get the taste out of its mouth. It didn't work. Nothing worked. The flavor persisted across time and space, a constant, horrifying reminder of humanity's greatest weapon: awful cooking taken to its logical, terrifying extreme. Dmitri watched from the ramparts, a satisfied smile on his face. "You see, Jenkins, every critic thinks they know everything. They come in with their refined palates and sophisticated tastes, but put something truly original in front of them, something that challenges their very preconceptions of what food can be, and they fold faster than a guardsman's cot." "Sir, I think you violated several treaties, and possibly a few laws of physics. Cooking isn't about rules, Jenkins, it's about passion. And my passion just saved this planet." Your passion made a hive tyrant cry. Tears of joy, surely. It was scraping its own taste buds off with its claws, sir. Molecular gastronomy often provokes strong reactions.
The Tyranid retreat was now the stuff of legend. The entire Hive fleet moved with the coordination of a restaurant staff that had just been told the freezer is broken, the gas line is leaking, and an inquisitor is in the dining room asking about portion sizes. The Swarm Lord itself,
the Hive Mind's ultimate tactical creation, appeared on the battlefield for exactly 3 seconds. It materialized, tasted the psychic remnant of what its forces had consumed, and immediately dematerialized with what multiple witnesses swore was a whimper. In the bioships above, the Norn Queens were not recycling the contaminated biomass. They were actively creating new organisms whose sole purpose was to contain and isolate the infected matter, like hazmat teams made of chitin and spite. "Sir," a guardsman rushed to the colonel. "The Tyranids are broadcasting on all frequencies." "What is it, son?" It's a warning, sir, to other Tyranid fleets. They're marking our entire system as, hold on, the tech priest is translating. Gastronomically hostile environment, level 5 biohazard, avoid at all costs. The colonel turned to look at Dmitri, who was now adding the final touches to what he called his critique response special. "Cookie, what have you done?" "My job, sir. I fed the troops. It's not my fault. The Xenos have no appreciation for experimental cuisine." "Experimental? You turned food into a weapon of mass destruction." "Sir, with all due respect, have you seen my budget? I've been doing that for years. The Tyranids just have more sensitive palates than we do."
As the last Hive ship limped towards the void, Dmitri prepared one final dish. Not out of cruelty, but out of professional pride. No customer leaves his establishment unsatisfied, even if that satisfaction takes the form of profound, soul-scarring regret. "Load the basilisks with the dessert course," he commanded. "Sir," Jenkins pleaded, "they're already leaving." "Exactly. But they haven't had dessert. What kind of chef sends a customer away without the complete experience?" The dessert course was Dmitri's magnum opus, the Compound 4 soufflé, suspended in a reduction of floor polish K77, infused with the essence of blessed machine oil, and garnished with crystallized industrial degreaser. It was less a food and more a war crime that happened to be edible, technically. The shells flew true, impacting the retreating bioships. The soufflé spread through their biological systems like a bad review going viral. The Hive Mind's final desperate message to the fleet was simple: never again. The battlefield was surreal. Thousands of abandoned Tyranid organisms wandered aimlessly, their connection to the Hive Mind severed not by psychic warfare, but by the Hive Mind actively refusing to taste what they were tasting. Rippers had formed small circles, apparently conducting what could only be described as support groups. Tergamon sat in corners, rocking back and forth. A Carnifex was observed trying to eat its own claws, apparently to replace the taste with anything else. The Imperial Guard didn't even need to fight. They just walked through the battlefield, collecting the catatonic Xenos. Some guardsmen offered the Tyranids water. The creatures took it gratefully, making sad clicking noises that universally translated to "thank you" and "why would you do this to food?"
The Administratum's after-action report was a masterpiece of bureaucratic understatement. It filed the incident on Kasterborous VII under Victory, subcategory Gastronomical, against an enemy force designated Hive Fleet Gourmand.
The enemy's status was officially noted as retreated with extreme prejudice and possible indigestion. Imperial casualties were meticulously recorded: 3,847 from combat, 67 from food poisoning, and one poor soul who had reportedly laughed himself to death. Enemy casualties were simply summarized as uncountable psychological trauma. The report credited this victory to a tactical innovation it called weaponized cuisine, followed by a stern recommendation: do not attempt to replicate. This was underlined twice and followed by an addendum reading, seriously, we mean it. In a final note, it was mentioned that the Corporal-Chef Dmitri Kuznetsov's recipes had been classified extremis diabolis by order of the Inquisition, and that the Hive Fleet had sent a formal complaint regarding violations of the Tyranid Convention on Biological Warfare, which, embarrassingly, the Departamento Munitorum now had to check if that was a real thing. But perhaps the most telling detail is a small footnote in the Xenobiology archives. 3 years later, a splinter fleet of Hive Fleet Gourmandis encountered an Imperial world. It should have been consumed in days, but a preliminary bioscan showed trace amounts of industrial degreaser X9 in the atmosphere from a single manufactorium. The entire splinter fleet immediately changed course and has not been seen in Imperial space since. The lesson is this: the Tyranids, who feast on stars and digest civilizations, met their match not in our greatest warriors or our most powerful weapons, but in a single fundamental truth about humanity. We are the only species in the galaxy that can turn eating into suffering, flavor into warfare, and a kitchen into a weapon of mass destruction. We are the only species in the galaxy that looks at industrial cleaning supplies and thinks, but what if we added this to the stew? The Hive Mind learned to fear many things: the Necrom's soulless technology, the Chaos God's corruption, but nothing in its vast alien consciousness provokes the same deep existential dread as the memory of Corporal-Chef Dmitri Kuznetsov's deconstructed biopaste with industrial finishing. The Tyranids still hunger, they still hunt, they still consume, but now they check the ingredients first. Somewhere in the galaxy, in a kitchen that violates most known health codes and several laws of physics, Dmitri Kuznetsov continues his work. He doesn't know he saved a world. He doesn't care that he traumatized a living god. He only knows that tomorrow the regiment needs feeding, and he has just received a shipment of something called Compound 5. The label says restricted to penal legions. Dmitri can't wait to see what it does to a sauce. The Emperor protects, Dmitri seasons, and the galaxy has never been safer or less appetizing.